episode of Quarantined Coaches, this time with Steve Sabins at West Virginia. How are you, sir?
Doing great, man. How are you doing?
I am doing all right. That's a pretty cool ceiling you got back there. Did you do that yourself?
My wife did it. This was an unfinished basement that I give all credit to Tabitha Sabins.
There you go. I've heard a lot of coaches saying that their wives are trying to make them do home improvement projects during this break, and all of them are incapable. There's no skills to do that.
Very limited skills. Don't own a lawnmower, but the effort's been pretty high. I've been vacuuming stairs and doing things I've never done before.
E for effort. All right, let's jump into it. My only experience in Morgantown was when I went for a game. My brother coached at Rutgers. I went for a football game, Rutgers versus West Virginia. And I was on the Rutgers sideline. I was getting cussed out by a teenage kid, and hot dogs were being thrown at me. And what I thought was, wow, this would be a great place to be the home team. It seems like the fan base is really passionate and has a lot of fun. What's it like up there? A lot of fun to play baseball there, right?
Yeah, I think sports are just king at West Virginia. It really is an electric atmosphere. The environment is exciting. I've been in the Big 12 now. I think this was my 10th year or 9th year. And as far as fans go and passion, it has to be one of the highest in the country. But there's no pro sports teams in this entire state. I think there's 1.8 million people, and there's no pro sports teams. And we're the largest major university in the state. And so you can imagine people just grew up Mountaineer fans. People grew up passionate about what's going on in Morgantown, West Virginia. So you got fans that switch from football to basketball to baseball to soccer. Guys are really passionate about all the sports, and you see some of those fans at all the games.
So West Virginia's entire athletic department has really made progress in recent years. And you've been there 5 years. What was the state of the baseball team when you got there compared to today?
Yeah, the programs have been really amazing. WVU football is the 14th all-time most winningest program in the country. Basketball has been really, really great. Women's soccer, men's soccer, both high-end programs. And Coach Mazey took over the program 8 seasons ago. He was the associate head coach at TCU. And he actually helped build a program, and he made the switch from the Mountain West Conference, I believe TCU was in, when they jumped into the Big 12. And at the time, Andrew Luck's dad, Oliver Luck, he was the athletic director at West Virginia. He hired Coach Mazey, and they were making that same transition. They were going from the Big East into the Big 12. And they hired Coach Mazey in that first year. I think everybody thought baseball had a chance of getting steamrolled in the Big 12 because there's some perennial powerhouses, some really good programs, some of the most all-time winningest programs in all the country. And that first year, long story short, West Virginia finished 3rd in the Big 12, and they were first with 2 weeks to go. That was 8 seasons ago. And that's coming off their last season in the Big East tournament. I'm sorry, in the Big East where they didn't qualify for the tournament. And so you fast forward, and West Virginia has been pretty special. In my tenure, which has been, this would have been my 5th season, so I guess 4.5 seasons or 4.25 seasons. The first season, they had 36 wins. We were right on the bubble. They said maybe we're the last team to not get into a regional. And that was the 20th year that WVU had not qualified for the NCAA tournament. And so we were really close. We knocked on the door the first season I was here. We played for a Big 12 title game that year against TCU in the tournament. So right on the brink. If we win that game, we're an automatic bid. We thought we had a chance to get in anyways, and they kind of labeled us as the first team out. The following year, we made a regional for the first time in 21 years. And so that was a really big deal for all of West Virginia, for Morgantown, for WVU sports. And it's because of what Coach Mazey and Coach Matlock, who's now the head coach at UTRGV, had built. And I got to be a helping hand in that. But they had built a $27 million stadium on top of a mountain. They invested resources. They got new coaches. They dialed into sleep and nutrition and recruiting and everything they could in order to be great. And they made that regional for the first time in 21 years. So it was really celebrated. From there, in 2018, we had our first top 25 recruiting class, which was a big deal. We were ranked preseason top 25 in the nation, which had never happened in program history before. And that all basically led up to the 2019 season. And that's when things got real exciting. And that was the last full season that we played. We hosted a regional in Morgantown. We were the 15th ranked program in the country. We had Duke and Texas A&M and Fordham come to our place. And that's when you talk about atmospheres and electricity. That's when Morgantown was hot, man. It was sold out. Tickets were $600 on StubHub for a college baseball ticket, which I had never seen or been part of. You couldn't get into the game. You had close family and friends that were calling to try to get into the game, and had our best season in program history. We had 8 draft picks, which was 10th in the nation for draft picks. We had a first rounder in Alec Manoa that was from Miami, Florida, that signed for $4.5 million. He was the 11th overall to the Blue Jays. It was definitely it was a season for the ages. We played for another Big 12 championship in the tournament again. And so it was fun. It was kind of like everything that we had worked on and worked for over the last 4 seasons in recruiting all came to fruition. Everything kind of came to a head, and we had guys that performed at a high level, and it just came down to players that wanted to be here and kind of put the program on their back and got to get into the national spotlight for the first time.
So let's break that down more, because that's quite a turnaround there. If we go and we start with the breakdown at the roster level, did you guys change from 8 years ago to now when the turnaround really started to happen? Did you change how you went about recruiting players, what you were looking for? Was there something specific, or were you flexible? Like, what changed in that regard?
Yeah, I think it's really easy to see when a program has success. You think that maybe something happened drastically different. I think the biggest change was obviously when Coach Mazey took over the program, but you can't go from 0 to 60 overnight. So it's been a slow building process, and we've certainly improved the quality of player that we've gotten, but that takes time because when Coach Mazey first got here, West Virginia was playing in a glorified high school park. I mean, it was aluminum bleachers with porta potties behind each dugout. And I was actually at Oklahoma State. I was on that coaching staff coming to West Virginia to play. So I remember, what they were doing with the previous facilities. And the truth is, a lot of recruiting comes down to facilities, and certainly comes down to coaches and the plan that you can build for players. But it's been a slow evolution. So in that 3rd year, when they finally have a new stadium, that changes the quality of player that you can bring in on a visit, and you got a chance of actually committing and getting here. And also you got a chance to develop guys, because there's a lot less time spent on raking fields and putting out tarps and those things that everybody takes for granted, and you think just maybe makes you a grinder, makes you a blue collar program, but it also sucks away practice time, and you only have so much energy in a day. So the resources has really helped us get better. But I would say flexibility in recruiting is absolutely a huge part of our game. I just looked before we got on this call because I wanted to be accurate when I said it, but we had 4 players from the state of West Virginia on our roster in 2020 and 3 in 2019 when we hosted the regional. And that's not because we don't love players from West Virginia. We absolutely do. We recruit West Virginia hard. We never take a player from West Virginia for granted, but it's just a small state, and it's a rural state. And so population-wise and the amount of kids that are playing baseball in this state, we have to go recruit other states heavily. And that's why the 2020 roster, we had 17 states represented in our roster. And so there's no when I first got in here, I was 27 years old. I think at the time there was an article, I was the youngest Power 5 assistant in the country. I was partly naive and dumb, but also eager. So someone could give me a name, or I would believe in somebody on the phone, and I'd go watch. It didn't matter if they were from California or Texas or Florida. And because of that young, dumb eagerness, I think I've been able to build some relationships across the country. but we have to do it to be successful. It's the kid that got left out. It's the kid that developed late. It's the guy that didn't play on the premier select ball team. It's the guy that made that jump a little bit later, that wasn't recruited as a ninth grader to the two in-state powerhouse schools, but he always thought he was a little bit better than committing early, maybe to a smaller school.
In looking at your roster, I think it was Vanderbilt, Michigan, you guys, I know you guys were all right up there when you talk about diversity and the number of African-American players that are on the team in terms of having the most. And then your entire roster is really diverse. Is there something to that? Is that part of the plan, or is it just kind of the way things work out for you guys on the recruiting trail?
Yeah, I don't think, for me, it's definitely not about part of a plan. The only plan that we have is to bring in the best people and the best players that we can. So it didn't matter geographically, socioeconomic background, skin color, none of that matters when we're evaluating ball players. And we're not always looking for the fastest or the strongest or the highest velocity. We really just want kids that love being on the field and want to play together. And part of the reason I think it's ended up being so diverse and we've had so much success is because the kids that are choosing to come to West Virginia, it's almost like it's self-filtering you out. You have to want to go far away from home and go to an unknown land and play for some coaches in a program that you don't know that much about. It's the excitement of doing something that people around you aren't doing. So all these kids have that in common. Although they're from all over, they all want to win a national championship for a program that hasn't done that ever, and they're all coming from far away. So it's almost like this comfort in, hey man, I'm from Jersey, I'm from Texas, I'm from Cali, I'm from Florida, I'm from Georgia. It's this comfort knowing that it's not the same kid you grew up playing select ball for the same select ball team that's been filtering into this program for 10 years. And so I think just diversity in general is a good thing. If you look at business, if you look at schools, I think diversity just breeds excellence in general. And because we have all these kids with different backgrounds, kids are bouncing off ideas and learning from each other and growing. And that's what the whole college experience is about.
So in being flexible with recruiting, you have to be flexible in coaching, right? Your team doesn't look this. Sometimes guys are able to build a team that looks a certain way and then be fairly consistent with their approach as coaches and the style of play. You guys obviously are not doing that. You know, it sounds like it changes from year to year. So how do you as coaches adjust to that? Like, is there just a meeting at the beginning of the year where you sit down and say, okay, here's our style of play this year?
Yeah, that's a great question. Coach Mazey is the best at it. He is a really, really good on-field guy, and so is Coach Ginther and Coach Garcia, our volunteer. They're both fantastic, all of them fantastic baseball guys and on-field guys. And I'm usually I push for organization and detail and practice plan, and I can almost get too caught up in that side. They're much more flexible, so they wait and they see and they evaluate and they get to see players. They really promote the freedom of the players and limit the mechanical thought and limit the amount of coaching probably early in somebody's career. So freshman year in the fall, kids are out there playing free. And all of a sudden you think you know a player, but 6 weeks in when they get a little bit more comfortable, all of a sudden they're doing things that you never imagined they could do. Or, hey, I remember seeing that junior year on a side field in Atlanta. That's what he looked like, but he was a little bit tight. He was a little bit frozen when he first got to college. So we are really, really flexible. I think in-game flexibility and deciding what type of team we want to be is really flexible. Recently, we've been one of the faster teams in the country. We've led the league in stolen bases, I think, the last 2 years. We've pitched really well. We led the Big 12 in ERA last year. Everything always comes back to pitching. So any way that we can find quality pitchers and develop pitchers, I think the rest kind of falls into place. But That's a good question, because we don't have a system. We don't have a book for how we're going to coach. Every year is much different.
When you, in order to turn a program around, you have to, I would think, be forward thinkers. And I know earlier you mentioned some like sleep analysis stuff, and you and I have talked on the phone about that a little bit before. Can you explain more how you guys have been forward thinkers to turn the program around, to get kind of a head start and be ahead of the curve on some of these things?
For sure. I think it all starts with recruiting. So being able to relay that message in our plan for development is huge, and it probably scares some players off. And so we try to be as transparent as humanly possible early on. So we're talking about our expectations in the weight room, our expectations with sleep, our expectations with nutrition, how we're going to treat each other, how we're going to practice. A few of those things, we were the first college baseball team to invest in sleep monitoring devices. It's evolved over the last 3 years. We're currently using a product called Whoop that you might be familiar with, but that measures heart rate variability. It has a recovery score, which basically lets the player and the entire staff know where they're at recovery-wise. And then we're able to adjust their practice plans. We're able to adjust their workouts, their recovery modalities, sleep, and some other factors to help kids get back quicker. And long story short, the reason we did that is because we travel more than any Power 5 school in the country. So our entire conference is located in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. And so we have more long trips than anybody. And then to open the season, we're traditionally going south to find warm weather. So we play in Georgia, Florida, Hawaii, California, Alabama, North Carolina a lot. And so we had to find a way for our players to bounce back quicker. We wanted to recruit high school kids primarily. We wanted to invest in development. And in order to do that, you have to educate young guys really quickly. So anything that we could do to get young guys back on their feet, to get them recovered, it all actually started that year. That first year I talked about us being the first team out that would have been 2016. We were the first team out, and it really chapped our ass. But we were also, that year, we were the youngest team in college baseball. We had more freshman starts by position players than anybody in the Power 5. And in the midway point, we lost 7 consecutive games, and we were tired and we were beat up, and our guys didn't quite realize what they were getting into when you're talking about travel. You're flying to Texas, you're flying back to Pittsburgh, you're getting on a bus at the Pittsburgh airport and then driving to Morgantown, and you're getting in on Monday at 2 a.m. and then class starts at 8 a.m. And so we had to do a way better job in figuring out what food do these guys need to eat? How much do they need to sleep? If we tell guys to sleep on Central Time when we're on the East Coast, is that going to benefit them when they get back to Morgantown? All those questions we started having to really unravel to figure out what's the best way to maximize our team. Because when it comes to just flat out getting 5-star recruits, we were in pretty good shape 4 years ago. We're getting great players, but there's some programs that, were recruiting 13 and 14-year-olds out of Team USA and had pretty good players and high-end talent, and they were turning down draft. And our whole mantra was development. It was, how do we develop guys better and faster and keep them healthier? And that's how we're going to compete in the Big 12. And it's a sliding scale. The more you win, the better recruits you get, and the better recruits you get, the easier that development curve probably comes, because they're more athletic and more talented. But that's been our bread and butter, man. It's been, I guess I just primarily spoke on Whoop, but we have a nutritionist. Her name's Senna King. She's best in the world. We say all the time, we're going to look up and she'll be the nutritionist for the Yankees here pretty soon. And that comes to individual nutrition plans with each player. That comes with ideas of what to eat and how much to eat before and after workouts, maximizing body fat percentage and where you need to be for position. And then our strength and conditioning coach, Sean Healy, does a fantastic job as well. We have WVU actually has a sports institute on campus where we've been implementing cryotherapy and light therapy and float tank therapy, which is basically getting locked into a room with water and floating, and you kind of lose sense of gravity. But that's supposed to help with recovery and mental health. And I could talk for an hour, I think, just on this side of things and the developmental side of things. We're certainly really passionate about that, and we think that probably gives us an edge in everything that we do.
Right. It's interesting because when you ask guys about being forward thinkers and implementing things, like rarely do you hear something like that. You hear a lot about technology usage, you know, in the cages or in the bullpens and things like that. So I find that intriguing. You had mentioned there, you know, about guys going out and, you know, it seems like the age of committing or offering players is getting younger and younger and younger. Is there a correlation between recruiting early and success?
No, I think there'd have to be some studies to show that, and there's not enough data yet, because that's probably started within the last 6 to 8 years heavily.
So then what are the reasons for going after 14, 15-year-olds?
Yeah, I think part of the reason and the motivation is just that sports in general are super competitive. And so everyone thinks that we're able to get a head start. You're able to beat your competition. You're able to find the kid early. And that makes sense. And there's some value to that. I think it just takes it's a mix. It's absolutely a mix. Some of it comes down to in-state pressure. West Virginia is different. We don't have as much of that. There's not the big powerhouse Power 5 school that's in our state that's maybe gobbling up high-end in-state recruits. And so it's become this game of there's absolutely nothing to do with these schools, obviously, but it's the Georgia and the Georgia Tech that don't want to lose out on that player. And so they know he's a great player, and should we pull the trigger, and should we offer, and should we get a commitment out of this guy, because we don't want another school to come in here and beat us on him. So that's kind of manifested in this earlier and earlier recruiting.
I see teams that get, you know, you have to make, let's just say, if you need 4 players, you have to make 10 offers, right? Because you're not going to get every player that you make an offer on. So how do you balance that, right? Like when, let's say there's 10 offers out and then a commit, you know, you get a commit out of that. Like, how do you guys adjust so that you don't end up, you know, getting too many?
Yeah, it's very difficult. And I think that's sometimes where, in general, the media or the general thought is that coaches are over recruiting on purpose. And I'm sure there's some of that, and that happens to some extent. But there's a lot unknown. I mean, especially in West Virginia, we're going to go offer the best players in the country. It doesn't matter if you live in Florida or Texas. We're just not afraid to make that phone call. We don't view as our time as too valuable to make a phone call and understand where a player's at. But every program's a lot different. Some programs might have to offer 20 players to get one. Some programs are in a position where they're getting 80% of the kids that they offer. And so every coach can end up with, oh, I think we got too many shortstops. We might have too many right-handed pitchers in a specific class. But again, it's just ever changing, depending on, you know, there's some amount of turnover on every roster, which also doesn't get talked about. There's players that break team rules. There's players that are homesick and want to transfer. There's players that maybe don't get along with the coaching staff. There's just there's so much human element to coaching that it's not a perfect science. And coaches that portray it as a perfect science, that, you know, we have 8 seniors leaving, and that's why we have an 8-person recruiting class coming in. That's just not how this works. And so human element, I think when people are aggressive and competitive and want to win in the highest end programs, they're probably a little bit more on the aggressive side because they rather be a little bit over than be under in not utilizing such a small amount of scholarship that they have. You know, we're the most under scholarship sport in all of college athletics. And so when it comes down to winning and putting a great product on the field, that's what coaches want to do.
Right. So I don't think that I have met a coach yet that agrees with the way the system is set up. I think pretty much everybody is in agreement that it would be better if we could slow down the system by changing the rules so that, one, the kids have more time to grow up and to research and to make smart decisions and not back out on you guys later, or not turn out to be the player that you project them to be. And then also, again, for you guys, right, so that you have more time to evaluate and make sure that you're getting the kid that you want. So with that said, I've gotten a lot of answers from a lot of coaches on this. How do you think we can slow it down and maybe make it a better system? Is there a way to do it, or is this just how it's going to be?
I think I've heard every possibility out there. I don't have a strong opinion on that. I think one of the best ideas that I've heard is the ability to sign somebody to an NLI as soon as you make that offer. And so they are bound by contract to that scholarship amount. And I think that would make a lot of sense in theory. In practice, if those coaches wouldn't want that player to show up, the player just wants to play. They just want to get somewhere where they're respected and loved and have a great opportunity to play for the most part. And so, I always go back and forth, because even in that instance, signed to an NLI, if a coach tells the player that we just don't think that you're going to be able to play here long term, I don't know how that would hold up. You would think the player would try to find somewhere to play. And so I don't have a great solution to it. Obviously, having more scholarships and players being on full scholarships would really help everybody. And you just had a limit of players, period. And then if it was like basketball, where guys had to go to school for 1 year, you would know what you actually have coming to school, because we're always playing with the draft and trying to evaluate where players are going to be drafted. So it's almost like the unknown nature of the draft doesn't allow it to be a perfect science to begin with.
Right. But then at the same time, that's the popular one that I hear also, and well, if it's coaches can't offer early, then, right? Like if you want to go ahead and put that NLI out, then go ahead, but you can't, because you don't know how the draft is going to shake out, or you don't know how this freshman class is going to shake out. It seems like that's the one I hear most often, because it's almost the easiest one to put into practice, right? Like there's not a lot of things you need to change, just that's the rule. If you're going to offer a kid that it's a binding contract on both sides and there's no decommitting, and then one, that makes the player really need to think before they make a decision that they're committing to long term. But same with the coach, right? Like, be careful if you're going to put that out there early. That definitely seems to be the one that is popular. Coach Sabins, I appreciate you getting on here, talking about West Virginia, just talking about recruiting in general. All good stuff, man. I hope I get to see you this summer out at a baseball field.
I'm sure I will. I think the first time I met you, I was in Florida. I don't know if you remember that.
I do, and I know exactly who I hooked you up with, and you ended up getting a kid out of there.
Yeah,
On a
that's
random
exactly
meet
right.
in kind of thing.
Yep, that's right.
So hopefully we can do that again this summer. You guys stay safe.
All right, you too. Thanks a lot.